Hola, buenas noches. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Vamos a cerrar este programa de conversaciones del día de la inauguración de Zona Marco con una gran charla. Más arriba. Vamos a cerrar el programa de conversaciones del día de la inauguración con una charla muy esperada. We are very happy to have you here. It's a honor. Today are joining us Stefano Collicelli, General Director at Luigi Pecci Center for Contemporary Art, Prato, Italy; Simone Krug, Curator for the Aspen Art Museum; Donna De Salvo, Senior Adjunta Curator at the Art Foundation, New York; and Tatiana Cuevas, General Director of Visual Arts at UNAM and Director of Museo Universitario Arte Contemporáneo. It's an honor to have you here. I leave you.
Thank you, Elisa, and thank you for joining us tonight. So, if you want to start.
I seem to be handed the mic, so. Can you all hear me? Okay, I'll keep it a little closer. Okay, fine. Well, I work for the DIA Art Foundation, which is a private art foundation founded in 1974 in New York City. And DIA has a collection and also has a series of permanent sites in different parts of the US and in Europe. The most well-known is Walter de Maria's Lightning Field out in New Mexico. And then there are two facilities in New York, one in Chelsea and one up in Beacon, New York, an industrial facility. So as a private institution, I would say the substantial amount of our funding is from foundations and private individuals. We did have a National Endowment for the Arts grant last year, which was then rescinded. We were fortunate that the money could be made up from others. I also spent 15 years as the chief curator and deputy director at the Whitney, and so saw, the issue of I don't know if total freedom exists anywhere. I think we have mission statements and we try to work within what is the mission of the institution and how we wish to deliver that. I think the thing that has changed dramatically in a good way of the last maybe 20 years is thinking more broadly about the audience, that there's not one public, that there's multiple publics. And I think that is led to programming that is more reflective of the diversity of communities. It's also had an impact even in the diversity of funding sources. At the Whitney, we were very fortunate. We had no exhibition committee. The exhibition program was determined largely in response to the needs of the institution. The one thing I think when you have a collection, as the Whitney does and DIA does, it has a grounding force too, to shaping what your vision is for the institution. There's no doubt that the last year in particular has been challenging. Maybe not in direct ways, but there's no doubt, and I of course speak to colleagues in other institutions where, the most dangerous thing is when there's self-censorship and that kind of chilling effect. So as I say, at DIA, we're fortunate in that way. I've seen many, over the course of years, different moments when things have become lightning rods, and we can talk maybe more about those. I'll hand it to you.
So I'm here from the Aspen Art Museum, which was founded in 1979, around the same time as DIA. And like DIA, in many ways, we are primarily privately funded. And I'd say what the Aspen Art Museum really values is that we are artist-led and artist-driven. And I thought I might even read a little section of our mission statement, which feels really important and also feels like something that our patrons understand. And so this is our value statement, to quote: We invest in artists and thinkers who pursue fresh, challenging ideas and in fostering vibrant, fearless discourse between bold thinkers from within and outside of the art world. As we expand and evolve, our commitment to self-reflection and curiosity remains unwavering. And so that's something that our staff understands, our patrons understand, and our artists know coming in and doing exhibitions with us.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks also for the Italian Institute of Culture. I'm Stefano Collicelli, and General Director of Centro Pecci, who's an institution in Tuscany. So I'm bringing another perspective from Italy. And we have a private foundation publicly funded. So we are in a kind of like a strange situation, but we are supported by the city of Prato, which is very popular and famous, especially for the textile industry, and in particularly for the regenerated textile, and the region of Tuscany, that is one of the most also iconic region in Italy. I've been working since 2022, and so we have gone through like a reshaping of the institution, having the audience and the various public at the center of the program, which is not only about the exhibition, but also on trying to create a community or different communities around a complex, an architecture that is quite huge. So we have a cinema, library, a restaurant, a bistro, an external arena for the events. We have educational laboratories. So the challenge is, because we are 20 minutes from Florence by car, but we are the center also in respect to the city center of Prato, how to involve a community by working on contemporary art, and at the same time by being not so central. So you really need to come and see what we are doing. For us as well, the collection is central in respect to how you can give a perspective or the sense of what you're doing. And also for me, the genealogy of the institution has been fundamental. So one of the biggest show has been a Mapplethorpe shop in the 90s, and still people remember the polemics around it because of all the sexual elements that are like very explicit. But at the same time, in the early 90s, there was a position, of a real activist position in respect to how to fight the stigma on HIV and AIDS with the people that got it. And so that is for me an important history where to grab the program. And so far I have to say that we navigated through a moment of history where there are a lot of complexity happening around the world historically and also in Italy. And what we have tried to do is never to shy away from the questions that are like the most complex, and try to provide a platform as an institution where you can really exercise democracy. So, and that is very helpful in the way in which we are like thinking what kind of discourse and what kind of exhibition, and how to respond also to our funders, so the region and the city of Prato. And I have to say that so far, because of the focus on how to build in communities around the institution, we found a very collaborative situation.
I think Donna, you mentioned something that's key to programming. First of all, being conscious for both sides from our institutions. One is, of course, the audiences and the multiple communities that we address to, and the other is the financial support that we may have from different sides. But in terms we have to balance between both. And I think the question that you mentioned, the risk of self-censorship in terms of when you program and you're conscious about, you have different communities that you want to be relevant to. And since it's a plurality, you have to raise different topics. But then I think the place from where you address those topics in terms of if you want to address women rights. Who's going to talk about that? Is it going to be a male curator? Or is it going to be, things like that? It's who's talking about what and when to speak about certain topics. So I don't know if this prompts you to...
I mean, I think you raise very good points. And yeah, I think it's being very thoughtful. It's interesting because the Dia Art Foundation is very artist driven. And it is very much also about offering the public a more unmediated relationship with the object. So if you come to Dia, you will not find any labels on the wall. There's a card you can take to read that gives you background. Place like the Whitney is the complete opposite. And so, you get into this question of whose voice is speaking, which is one of the issues you're speaking about. There's a kind of institutional voice, and then there's the voice of the artist that's allowed to and should be forefront. In fact, at the Whitney for many years, we would not put the name of the curator who curated the exhibition because there was a belief that it sort of privileged that one point of view. But then again, the institutional point of view becomes a sort of corporate voice. So, these are just decisions one makes. And also bringing other voices in. I think that's very important because there is often no one meaning that we're grappling with. I think what you talked about in terms of looking at also historical context is incredibly important because oftentimes, people have a reaction to something because they're seeing it for the first time or they don't really have a historical understanding, a context for that moment. When you see things in that context, first of all, you see the repetition of things oftentimes over centuries. And I think it also equips the viewer, gives them agency to make up their own mind. So, it's always this kind of negotiation that we're in to not tell people what to think, but to give them enough so that they also don't feel intimidated or patronized to, all these different thoughts. And of course, I think we all probably work with our colleagues in learning and engagement in the education departments to talk things through. So I think that's very important on that level to be able to put things in that context. But there's also inevitably can be controversy. And I don't think we want to shy away from that either, because then it's all about, I don't know, if we're not asking questions, are we really doing our work?
And you mentioned about the genealogy of our institutions. In your case, being really, very frontal with situations at the moment. Do you feel you can be that frontal now?
Absolutely, but I think you always have to do it in a way that you read the room. No. So you try to build up alliance. For me, it has been important to build up alliances. So, for example, when I arrived. The first year and a half, I invited Forma Fantasma, who did the display of various exhibitions, and I asked them, could you think a display for a permanent collection? And within that specific path, we inserted one of the work that was acquired by the museum, actually was donated by the father of an artist who died of HIV. And so from 2023, there was this kind of seed of a long history of HIV. And then this year, we opened a show dedicated to what happened in Italy between 1982 up until 1996 on artists that were HIV involved. And it's something that has never been done in Italy, a survey of what happened to many of those artists that have been also forgotten because they got HIV and the art world at the time weren't really pay attention. And that is also a way of keep asking questions on sexual education, affect education. Now there is a huge debate in Italy that this should have been done by families rather than by school. and it means that family often they don't have the instrument to teach sexual education or affect education, and we have also an issue of violence, domestic violence. So for me, when an institution starts to allow itself to bring together, taking the art as the main point of view, also things that can affect the debate and the way in which we are thinking nowadays to issue, for me is very important. And what I'm trying to do also is not to think in terms of public program, but rather to create a series of format or activities that can be thought as in response to what has to be needed. So there are events that bring together people looking at performance and the body and different ways of expressing the bodies. There are moments, and these are always done with other association or organization that are high quality for the level of what they're doing in terms of research. And they're like all living around the museum in the Tuscan region, let's say. And so you bring together forces that allow this voice that you are asking, who has the right to speak about what. And for example, we are also addressing many political issues from Ukraine war, from Palestine, and this has been done without the disrupt of the public discourse, because in a way it's really to understand what's happening now that is at the center. And we always started from a work of art or a film or a book, and then from there there's a discussion that we can see has a response on the public. So people come because they want really to finally understand better what is happening from different voices. And even in these cases, we are involving people that can talk about topics that they know very well. So this is the strategy.
Simone, you wanted to add something?
Well, I have follow-up questions actually for you, which was, and then I can also speak to this question, but what was the response like to that particular exhibition?
The HIV show?
Yeah, to the HIV show.
Actually, the title is Vivono, so it means they live, art and affect. And so we really point the attention to a kind of bright side of people that really want to express themselves, even if they were living in dark times in their personal life and in the moment in which they really didn't know how HIV could be stopped in a way. And so the response has been like very positive in both from the mainstream press. So we have Vanity Fair, Vogue, Harper Bazaar covering it, and they were very happy that finally someone was talking about issues that are questions that everybody every day are facing, you know, sexual behavior, but also how you can think in moment in which you really don't see the hope, that you can instead keep making art, keep making your voice visible, and you can still have an alliance beyond families, so friends, lovers, and you can express that love, that friendship in a very tangible way. So to bring back to life all these works, but also all this kind of connection with many people that were involved by the curator, Michele Bertolino, to discuss with him during 3 years how this work could be presented, how many of these documents could be presented. It's very relevant. It has been like very well received in a way. And sometimes in terms of funding, there were some companies that didn't feel completely, and I could understand it, and I didn't push them. It's like, I'm sure we can find other projects to collaborate together. But then there were many other that were very much enjoying the fact that they could provide another angle on art of this year and of these kind of topics.
Simone, do you want to speak a little bit more about, an institution that's, we're all artist driven, but you're especially as DIA. Have you found any situation that, maybe the artists wouldn't be comfortable working with a specific sponsor, or that you had to shift your strategies, institutional strategies?
In my personal experience, we've been lucky. We have not had to shift our institutional, or my personal and our institutional strategies. And I think, our patrons have political beliefs across the whole spectrum, but I think that they understand and they know that like the kinds of programming that we're doing is important. I will also say, though, something that we were talking about before just made me think about the idea of like what is an institutional voice and what is a curatorial voice. We involve artists both to do exhibitions with us, but also we involve them as curators. So they sort of speak in dialogue with us. We have a whole curator at large program. We work with people on a singular project that they've researched for many years. And we work with, curators at large based way, way beyond Aspen, in London and New York and what have you. And so all of these kind of different nuances that I think exist for us as ultimately as an institution that does not have a collection. We are a Kunsthalle. And I think we're able to be really nimble and we're able to kind of think on our feet in that way.
There have been, in the case of MUAC, in 2024, we had a very strong reaction from a specific community in Mexico City that made us see that we had made a curatorial mistake. And it was right in the front. It was, graffiti on the doors. It was really, and we realized that we had made a mistake. We recognized it publicly, and we opened a dialogue with that community and with a bigger community. That was certainly a piece of learning that we didn't expect, but that we recognized. Have you faced a similar situation, and how did you deal with it? Maybe, maybe not at DIA, but maybe your previous responsibility at the Whitney with the strikes and with the open, protests against sponsors and things. How did you?
Yeah, the Whitney, I think, in one of the biennials, it became, it's very well known, it's public. There was a painting that was put in the biennial by the artist Dana Schutz. And it was a painting of Emmett Till, who was a very young African-American boy who was horribly beaten and killed by a white mob in the South. And Dana, at the time, I think she had just had a baby or was about to have a baby. Her response to the subject was as a mother looking at this child. And Mamie Till, Emmett Till's mother, decided when the funeral was held in the funeral home, she opted for an open casket because she wanted people to see what they had done to her son. That image was then published in Jet magazine, which is a very well-known publication in the African-American community. And it is seen as the image that essentially catalyzed the civil rights movement. Now, Dana is a white woman. It was an enormous criticism that she should not be making a painting of Emmett Till. There was a critic actually based in the UK who was the first, and then it sort of mushroomed. There were people who showed up who stood in front of the painting with signs behind their back. The director decided, and I think it was the right decision. There were calls to take the painting down. We said, no, we're not going to take the painting down. And it raised the whole question of subject matter, and do certain artists own certain subject matter? It was tough. It was very public. It was in the newspapers, media. There were many people in the artist and critical communities who more or less formed camps of support, not support. And then there were artists who also said, an artist should be free to depict any subject matter they want. So it raised many, many issues. The Whitney decided to organize a symposia at Claudia Rankin, who had written done a lot of work on race. And there was a public forum, which I don't know that it really satisfied anyone at the end. It was important to have an airing, to have the discussion. But it's also interesting of the limits to some extent of what you can do in an institutional situation. I think people were afraid to say certain things, others weren't. That was quite something. And on that level, I think that the institution had not fully done its homework to anticipate. But then again, I don't know if it could have fully. I think this is the important reason that it's been in the United States, and I think we're living through now a backlash, just like after, frankly, the Obama presidency, where we have a greater diversity of voices in institutions, many more people of color in institutions, because people speak from a lived experience, and you can speak with authenticity from lived experience. And I think that's been a very important and powerful change. And we are now, in the United States at least, and not just in the art world, but in other worlds, really now confronting the backlash to those shifts in power. Because what we're talking about so much here has to do with power, who gets to speak, who is silenced, where you can go, where you can't go. And just to add, I think this is why it's so important, to have a director of an institution who really embraces those things. Great directors always say you cannot get ahead of your board. So you have to know when you have a problem, you can go to your board because they're behind you, and they offer counsel on many levels. But it's imperfect what we do. Maybe that's the great part of it on some level. We never kind of fully know. But this was a very specific and very difficult thing for the institution to go through. I think the Whitney learned a lot from it in a great way, in a good way.
I'm just struck by the idea of what an apology is or what acknowledging a mistake is. And I think part of being a curator or part of just working at a museum or a public institution is this idea of listening and hearing and creating a public forum, and hearing that that's what the Whitney did is just really striking to me and feels like this effective way of listening and speaking and creating that dialogue.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's also why institutions are still so relevant, despite the institutional critique and all the debate that has sparked the power position that an institution have. At the same time, these kind of moments and the kind of strategies that you try to use to avoid to have the mistake are part of the life of an institution. But at the same time, we should recognize the fact of the fragility of an institution and the fact that we can make mistake, and it's okay. It's important that you apologize, you understand what is the mistake, because often provides a new space for learning, no? And of course you should try to avoid it, but at the same time institutions are also the kind of space that allow for this kind of elements that are in the society or debate that maybe are not visible to suddenly become something visible. And so you have to respond, and the way in which you respond and the way in which you continue the engagement with the community decide if the institution will be stronger or weaker, and on also what kind of support it's bringing. For me, it's very important that in our case, we rely a lot on taxpayer funding, and I also have to do fundraising with private funding, and for me it's important that people understand why they're paying taxes to support a contemporary art institution, and make them understand that that's their home, their house, and they can come and they can look at a cinema, having a date, having a coffee, having a fancy dinner, looking at art, and the engagement with the art and with the artist, as always, in my mind, through what could be in the responses of the communities, because also Prato has like 115 nationalities. That is quite peculiar for an Italian city of 200,000 people. So the way in which you try to balance all these different presence within a life of an institution is always like something that could be, it's in a way fragile. So you can try to understand how to navigate that, but of course it could happen that things get wrong, and then it's the way in which you act that also make an important twist in the mind of people that are still supporting you.
Something that we learned from that experience is that it was a positive thing in the middle of the complication and the crisis, but that for so many years and decades, museums, we have this mission to approach to bring something to society to think about and to be conscious and to be critical. And, we've been trying to build that. So now, finally, we realized that we've planted that seed and that it had grown, and now it's coming back to us, which is good. That was the really positive side, that we've actually managed to make that connection to produce critical thinking and to make us think about what we're doing. So it's I usually thought of shaping my programming in order to shape society's way of thinking. And now I think society is helping us shaping our programs, which is, I think it's a major shift and really important. And that it's not only us. I mean, I think in many institutions in the world.
Add something to that?
Sure.
I think along the lines of what you're saying is, I do think that, and I've seen this happen in some institutions in the United States, where sometimes we lose sight of the art. And I've heard some institutions which have said our role is social justice. This is a very slippery slope because it raises expectations of what people can expect from their institution. And I think that social justice can play out in many ways. To me, giving voice to people and artists who were previously voiceless or marginalized, that's social justice. Certain kind of revisionism that takes place where certain aspects of history have just been written out and now they're finally part of the record. That's social justice. But we also have to remember that we're art institutions. And so within that, that's what we're about. And then it plays out in all different kinds of ways, depending on the kinds of art. I mean, of course, at a place like DIA, which is very well known for, of course, its minimalist collection, it's very rare to find a human face at DIA, for the most part, because it's mostly a lot of minimalist work. But that's changed. I mean, there are different art. I just did a project with Steve McQueen, and there are Renee Green, who has a great project. So it's a little different in that sense. But I did want to point out this idea of a certain responsibility we have to our public. And we were talking earlier, I was at the Whitney when we presented a Jeff Koons retrospective. And, you can't do a Koons retrospective without including the work that he made with his wife, Cicciolina, who was she was in the Congress? I always forget. Yes. She was a porn star and in the Congress.
She entered in the Congress.
Yeah, maybe they're the same thing. I don't know, but that's a whole other thing. But, so then there was the education department thinking through, okay, the warning label, what do you put? And, there are people who come to a museum, they come to the Whitney, they come with their families, and it is appropriate to put a warning label. And then it's a parental responsibility. But we had even levels. We had one room, I had my 13-year-old nephew who came, and there was one room I said, oh, it's okay, you can go in here. But then there was another room past that room where I said, oh, you can't go in there, got a little bit more. But, people do put a degree of faith in us. And there is a social contract and responsibility. And to me, I don't have any problem with that. I don't think it's censorship. I think it's thinking about the audience. It's their choice to go in or not go in. So you put out the warning. It's like a rating, rated R, whatever rating system it is. So, I don't have an issue with that when we come across, things like that. I don't know how much you've dealt with that Aspen that has really overt content. Oh, well, we were talking earlier.
We've done a few projects with pretty overt content, and I will say Aspen has, in a sense, multiple publics, but all of our programming is sort of for one singular public. Of course, in a place like Aspen, you have, a patron class who are coming in from LA, New York, San Francisco, what have you, and then you have, a population that's permanently in this region. Historically, we were talking about Warhol and some sort of full frontal male genitalia that we showed in 2021, 2022, curated, this Warhol show curated by the artist Monica Maioli. And we had a warning sign, and we had some contextualization in front of this space that was sort of its own closed off room. I remember about a week before the show, we realized we needed a curtain. I don't know what we were thinking we could have it open. And what really surprised me about that was that our public trusted us. They knew that they could read that sign and they could peek their head in and say, okay, this isn't appropriate for me or for my kids or what have you. It really surprised me that no one got more upset about it. But I think it's this trust that you're coming into this institution and you sort of know what to expect. If there's a space in this museum that you might feel uncomfortable in, we will tell you, try to tell you.
We had the first institutional show by an American artist called Luis Fratino, who was quite popular in terms of market success, but at the same time he never got an institutional show ever. And because that year was dedicated to the Tuscan region at the center of our program, so we were working with many women artists that having a fantastic career and practice who never shown in the museum, and we did a collective show. And then after there was the show by Luis, who has always been very open in showing homoeroticism scene, very also graphic, but at the same time within a tradition of art history, landscape, nudes, still life, have always been portraits, have always been part of his practice. So we didn't want to divide the show, and we wanted instead to take in Italy and his inspiration, because he has been largely inspired by literature and by art history, to show an entire around 60 works of his 8 years production. And at the beginning there was a bit of art and pornography, because there were some works that were very explicit by the local press, but then when also they realized that the Financial Times, Guardians were all coming to Prato to see the show and to make reviews, I think they also interviewed the public. They were all thrilled by looking at beautiful paintings that were showing tenderness even through sex, but also through daily life where two people are taking care of each other. In a way, also the context of the way in which the local press was talking about the show changed completely, because everybody was very happy. So of course we put the warning, and of course you need to make people aware of the fact that it is a show that could be more explicit. But what I found very beautiful, it was that many families were taking agency, and so people were entering with their kids, and that could be a chance to families to talk about sex and gay sex. And also for me it was interesting because I think many people were questioning their own sexuality or behavior, so it was also that's something that was very interesting. And together with the Luis Fratino show, after a while we opened a show dedicated to Margherita Manzelli, who's an Italian painter that is looking at the female body as not just object of desire but subject of desire in a very David Lynch way in the way in which she's presented these bodies. And for me, it was a way also of linking to what we lived through the pandemic and the fragility of ourselves and our bodies. That was something we really shared at a global level. And we did also a Peter Rougeard show because he came to Italy. And also in that case, the photograph of Peter Rougeard were really like looking at a community of people that often has been marginalized or not so well represented, especially in Italy. So in a way, these three shows were like contextualized for a public, how the representation of body and people living different ways their bodies could be enriching your own experience of art and of your life. And that was like well received.
Sorry, can I just add one thing? Because I know in the topic for our talk, there was the word management. And so I just wanted to say a little bit about, and maybe there's some aspiring younger curators here, or people who already are curators. But, one of the things I think sometimes we lose sight of, and, I've been a chief curator, so I had I managed a team of like 24 people and 8 curators, and being a curator myself, I think sometimes people don't realize the very almost schizophrenic role that curators have, because we're in this place where we have to advocate for the artist and advocate for the institution, and it's not easy to do. And I think a healthy institution is one where there is a true respect for creativity from the artist, but also from the curatorial mind. And I saw this over time in how museums have changed. I remember the time I worked at Tate Modern, when it was moving from an old-fashioned model of they had a scholar who put together the checklist, and then they had an organizer who did all the other nuts and bolts. And they kept saying they're going to move to the American model. And what it became increasingly was that you spent most of your time doing administrative work, cultivation, and there was no time to think anymore. And I still, I think it's very hard to retain or to create the structures that allow that time for what I like to think of as percolation. And, we live in a culture now where everything's so fast. Now we have to deal with AI. We have things coming at us left and right. And of course, the desire is to be responsive, to keep up. At the same time, thinking takes time, and being thoughtful takes time. And I think that's also something that can be very much in danger, as much as something. But I just wanted to put that out there because, it's an important thing. And if we can create that kind of community of thinkers and collaboration, then you weather a lot. When things get bad, you can get through it and you can get to the other side of it. Because, as you said, it's fragile. We're not making widgets. Nobody cares. If we went away, I don't know what would happen. You know what I'm saying? In America, we're so functional. Culture in the United States is a whole other thing. And yet they're great things. Well, we just stay the course now. But I didn't want to put that because I know you're managing a team as well.
No, and also I think you're putting into the table the three key aspects that we need to balance. It's the artist, the curator, which is the mediator between the artist and the institution, but also the institution. I think the three, there shouldn't be I was trained as a curator. I was a curator for more than 20 years, and I have assumed this the position of director, and suddenly I'm the bad cop, and it's I'm taking care of the institution. And it comes from taking care of the artist and my curatorial team and my whole team that I care for the institution. I'm not the bad cop. So it's more, it's mutual care. I think that's key. In these three, I'm putting the curatorial team, but I think it's the whole museum team taking care of the artist, but also the institution, and the artist should take care of the institution and the institution of the artist. So it's a mix. And I think maybe just to begin to round up, just to go to the beginning, that I described that maybe even in the middle of the kind of world that we're living, that we can discover ourselves and our institutions within a certain freedom in programming, in fundraising. But I think we shouldn't confuse freedom with the ethical practice of freedom. And sometimes you have to choose when to show something and when maybe it's not the best time to show it. So either you put it away or wait a little bit until it's the right moment. But it's the ethical practice of freedom that I think we should keep in mind. I don't know if there's time for questions. If you have any question, comment, or we can begin to round up with, any thoughts that you may have at the end of this conversation.
What a wonderful conversation. So much to discuss and continue this dialogue.
And thank you for being such a terrific moderator.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
No,
thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.